child came out to wander, caught a dragonfly inside a jar. Fearful when the sky was full of thunder, and tearful at the falling of a star. And the seasons, they go round and round, and the pains of ponies go up and down. We're captive on a carousel of time. We can't return, we can only look behind from where we came, and go round and round and round in a circle again. Then the child moved 10 times round the seasons.
Joni James arrived at Founder's Gap the day after Labor Day. It was evening time in the Appalachian Mountains of eastern Kentucky, and while darkness had crept into the valleys below, the high ridges still had some light to them, a soft kind of light brushed with rouge, yet casting a fiery glow on the surrounding hillsides, where the remaining rays of the day's setting sun still reflected. The trees hadn't yet succumbed to their autumn colors, but the crimson sunset made the leaves look red. It was beautiful, Joni thought, and lonesome at the same time. "Red clouds at night are a shepherd's delight," said the man carrying Joni's designer suitcases up the rickety steps of the 100-year-old cabin. Joni looked at him, confused, twitching her lips to one side as she often did when she was trying to figure something out. Her luggage carrier just shrugged his shoulders before tripping onto the top of the front porch, then collapsing into a rocking chair. "Did you bring all of Lexington with you?" the man asked Joni, rolling his eyes in a playful manner before smiling. Joni saw the mischief dancing in his eyes. Even though she had only known her luggage carrier since the 45-minute bumpy ride up the mountain in a Jeep Wrangler, she felt at ease with him. She sensed a playful yet protective quality about him, the kind of teasing but doting uncle inflicts on his younger and naive nieces. Joni dropped her oversized fossil handbag to the floor and answered, "All except the horses and the bourbon." She smiled too. "Damn shame. Could have used some bourbon." Her luggage carrier sighed, motioning for Joni to sit in the rocker beside him. "Sit a spell. There ain't no time constraints up here." "Shouldn't I get settled before dark?" Joni petitioned, yet followed his orders. "Oh, yes, that's right. We ought to start rounding up as many candles as we can find and look for some kerosene lamps. And I reckon we ought to make sure you can find your way down over the hill to the outhouse before it gets good and dark on us." Joni's eyes got big. Guess she couldn't hide her horror at the thoughts of having no power or indoor plumbing up on the mountain. With all the research and planning she had conducted about volunteering to be the historic site of Founder Gap's winter caretaker, why in heaven's name didn't she inquire about electricity? She had assumed it was just a given. Joni's luggage helper couldn't hide his amusement any longer and busted out laughing, throwing his head back against his rocking chair. He tightly squinted his eyes shut as he continued to snigger, his chest heaving heartily from the hefty amount of laughter. The deep creases in his aging skin around his eyes told Joni this man had laughed a lot during his lifetime. He stomped his worn hiking boots on the old porch floor, giving one more gee-haw as he slapped his thigh with his hand. "You Yankees, y'all believe anything," the man managed to say as he shook his head. Joni became more at ease with his laughter, but was starting to get slightly annoyed. There was a fine line between playful tease and being offensive. She furrowed her brow and opened her mouth to defend herself, something she was quite comfortable doing. But her luggage carrier held up a hand to silence her. His laughter soon abated, and he looked at her genuinely. "I'm sorry," he said. "There's no need to get your feathers ruffled. You haven't stepped into a scene from the Deliverance, and you ain't going to get harassed for being an outsider. I don't care what you've read about us here in Appalachia, but we're good people here. There's good people at Founder's Gap, good people in these here communities, and we're going to be as good as gold to you, okay?" Joni looked down at the aged wooden timbers of the porch floor. She hadn't been in Founder's Gap no time until she was ready to fly into attack mode. Why did she have to feel so defensive all the time? Her strong disposition had gotten her through childhood without a mother, having to care for herself as well as her father, who worked long hours to prove he was a capable and highly sought-after defense attorney. Her strong disposition had gotten her through undergraduate studies while holding down a waitressing job and a political internship in the halls of the state's capital. Her strong disposition had also gotten her through graduate school, helped her advance in her job as a lobbyist, and had given her the courage to travel hundreds of miles away from home by herself to the rugged and remote hills of eastern Kentucky, where she would look after a historic landmark for a national park on top of a mountain for a 7th-month commitment. Her strong disposition had gotten her far during her 32 years, but it hadn't gotten her many friends. There was never really any time for that. Joni looked back up at her luggage carrier, who had an apologetic look about him, but was still trying to contain his laughter. "There's no need to apologize," she said. "There's absolutely nothing wrong with good-natured ribbing." "Well, Miss Bluegrass, you'll get plenty of it around here," he replied. "But I shouldn't have scared you like that, then laughed about it to boot. I know you must be nervous and all about coming way up here all by yourself, especially to a place that's 3,000 feet above sea level and is a right good drive to the closest community, and then that community only consists of a post office, mom and pop store, and a junkyard. Tell you the truth, I don't know if I could do it. But you're safe here, guaranteed. Boone National Park has the finest staff and the best security you'll find. I wouldn't waste my time volunteering for them if I weren't impressed with them. They're going to look after you real good." Joni's luggage carrier leaned in closer, his eyes twinkling with mischief again, and whispered, "Hey, the best part is they pipe in the sunshine at the beginning of every week so you don't have to worry about being in the dark up here. That's pretty high-tech for a place like this, don't you reckon?" Both laughed again. "Well, I managed to get a snigger out of you, Miss Bluegrass," Joni's luggage carrier said, then leaned back in his rocking chair with a more serious look. "You know, we're going to be working together for the next 7 months, and I sure hate to think I'd have to call you Miss Bluegrass the whole time." He reached out a hand. "My name is Denver Hensley." Joni took his hand and shook it. "My name's Joni James. It's a pleasure to meet you, Denver Hensley," she responded. "Joni. Now that's a right smart name. I don't figure you for the Chachi type. So you must have been named after Joni Mitchell, am I right?" Denver asked. "Oh, you're good," Joni exclaimed. "I have to admit I'm pleasantly surprised." "I knew it," Denver slapped his knee. "You're the right age to be a hippie's daughter. Your father's a big-time bleeding heart defense attorney, and you're involved with the Kentuckians for a Brighter Future, which is probably the most liberal organization in the state. They ain't no way that type of Joni is a happy days kind of Joni. You're a Joni Mitchell, Miss James, through and through. You're a big yellow taxi, Woodstock, and Chelsea morning, my dear." Joni looked at him inquisitively. Was Denver taking a pot shot at her after apologizing only a minute ago for his teasing? She didn't want to come off too defensive again, but what most perplexed her was how he was familiar with her background. That was unsettling to her. She came to Founder's Gap to get away from society for a while, and to be virtually an unknown entity while throwing herself into her doctoral dissertation. The last thing she needed were busybodies digging into her past. "Cool your jets, Joni." Denver held up his hand again. "I ain't no psychic, and I sure as heck ain't no stalker." He paused for a moment and explained. "I was in the park security office the other day and couldn't help but overhear a phone conversation with your daddy on the other line. Your daddy, Martin James, I think, was his name. He was making it abundantly clear who he was and how powerful he was. He told our head of security what would happen to him if anything happened to you." Joni could have melted into the century-old wooden floorboards beneath her feet. She couldn't believe her father had intervened in her life again. She loved her father, but always felt stifled by his overprotective tendencies, plus the fact that the once humble but now arrogant, not to mention wealthy, defense attorney thinks he can bully people with his power. It wasn't too long ago, over dinner at Malone's in Lexington, that Joni mustered up enough courage to talk straight to her father, reminding him of both their modest backgrounds. He was celebrating yet another highly publicized courtroom victory that brought an ungodly amount of money to his private law practice, and was becoming inebriated on the generous rounds of Woodford Reserve he had ordered for the guests at his table. It was probably the few shots of whiskey Joni threw back that gave her the nerve to talk to her father in such a manner. When the dinner guests were all gone after stammering for their taxis, Joni told her father she was worried about him. She told him he was evolving into everything that both of them had always fought hard against: money and power. In the early years, Martin had fought for the little man, accepting everything from cattle to cases of moonshine as payment for his legal defense. Money didn't matter to him in the beginning, only doing what was right based on his morals that were doctrine and what he always called his liberal hippie politics. But time has a way of changing people, and so does money, Joni supposed. Her father told Joni that night he would end his love affair with prestige, and even promised he would do some pro bono work for the Kentuckians for a Brighter Future, a civil rights and environmental awareness organization to which she served as a board member. His promise, however, only lasted as long as his hangover on stout Kentucky whiskey. A few days later, when an important environmental case came up with Joni's group, her father chose to take on a high-profile case that involved a prominent Lexington widow and champion racehorse owner who was being charged with conspiracy to commit murder. What disappointed Joni the most was that her father didn't even appear to be sorry when he told her he was taking the wealthy widow's case instead. He tried to convince her in classic Martin James defense style that the money this Lexington socialite would bring to his practice would be monumental, and with a few more cases like hers, they would never have to worry about money again. She remembered looking sadly at him, saying, "Money doesn't worry me. Losing you does." "Babe, I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere," her father declared. "You're already gone," Joni said flatly, showing little emotion, although her heart was breaking. She stood up from the plush velvet chair in her father's office and headed toward the door. She paused for a moment, then turned around to face her father again. "After losing Mom, I always was afraid as a little girl that I would lose you too," she told her father. "Remember how you used to tuck me in at night after laying sometimes hours with me listening to Joni Mitchell records and trying to teach me all the lyrics?" Joni stopped speaking to search her father's face for any kind of reaction. His countenance conveyed nothing. He was stoically calm. Joni looked out the window, ribbons of filtered sun highlighting the auburn strands of her long brown hair. She began reciting a line from Woodstock. "We are stardust, we are golden, and we've got to get ourselves back to the garden." "That was one of my favorite Joni Mitchell songs that you made me learn," Joni awkwardly laughed, then fixed her eyes on her father once more, desperately searching for any signs of a response. She saw nothing but 20 years of career-top pride and stubbornness staring back at her. Joni knew he wasn't going to say anything. She looked down at her feet, something she always did when she was nervous or embarrassed, and then met her father's glare one last time. "Remember how you would always promise me every night after climbing out of my bed and kissing me on the forehead that you would never leave me? Well, you broke your promise." Then Joni walked out the door. That night, while curled up in bed, browsing job opportunities on her laptop, Joni saw an ad for a caretaker position that was needed for a small historic site on top of a mountain in a national park somewhere in the middle of Appalachia. She didn't know why, but she was intrigued by the Help Wanted ad. She even tried scrolling past it, but ended up coming back to it not once, but 3 times that night. Founder's Gap. Where in the world is Founder's Gap? It seemed as though the more Joni became disenchanted with her work, not to mention her social life, and the more her relationship with her father became strained, her curiosity of Boone National Park, particularly Founder's Gap, would increase. She spent her nights reading about the park and the history of Founder's Gap online, clicking on every park link that would provide more information about this obscure place. At work, Joni would do more research about turn-of-the-century homesteading than making phone calls to legislators, pressuring them to support House bills that would create a more sustainable future for the state of Kentucky. Her interest in Boone National Park and Founder's Gap also began distracting her from dissertation work on her doctorate. Everything in Joni's life was geared toward the future, working as a lobbyist to help build more viable lives for Kentucky residents, and working on her doctorate so that she might one day fulfill her father's dream and become an Ivy League professor. But recently, for reasons Joni could not explain, she was being drawn to the past, to Founder's Gap historical site in Boone National Park. Maybe it was just the stress of her job, her disappointments with her father, or maybe even her lack of a social life that compelled Joni to seek out this place tucked away in the remote hills of Appalachia. Was she that dissatisfied with her life that a small national park in the middle of nowhere had the power to preoccupy her time and attention? When she began seriously thinking about applying for the caretaker's position, she quickly snapped herself out of entertaining such nonsense. She threw herself back into her work when a major House bill was proposed that would protect Kentucky streams, and even made herself go out on a couple of dates, none of which made Joni believe there would ever be a man out there for her. On her last date, which was arranged by a colleague of hers, Joni infuriated the up-and-coming lawyer with political aspirations by leaving their dinner abruptly and without apology. Joni had zoned out on much of the young attorney's bragging and grandiose banter while sipping her tomato bisque soup. But when he mentioned the day's date, it startled her back into reality. "What did you say?" Joni asked. "I said the judge would probably never forget this date, July 31st, 2013, because he had one of the finest closing arguments to have ever been presented in his—" Wait! Did you say it was July the 31st? Joni interrupted, grabbing the linen napkin covering her crossed legs and laying it on the table. Yeah, her date answered with a cocked brow. "Anyway, that's besides the point here. The point I was trying to make was that the judge—" "Oh, I gotta go," Joni exclaimed. She didn't finish hearing what the man said as she bolted up out of her chair like she had just received news of an emergency and ran out of the restaurant, leaving her tomato bisque soup and pompous date simmering. "I can do this," Joni motivated herself as she hopped into bed and turned on her laptop. It was ticking on 10 p.m. and she had only 2 hours to compose an impressive cover letter, update her resume, and come up with 3 reference letters before time was up at midnight. Today was the last day to apply for the Founder's Gap caretaker position. "I can't believe I'm doing this." Joni laughed to herself as she frantically typed away at her keyboard, hell-bent on getting her resume and credentials submitted on time. What came over her so unexpectedly to apply for the job was a mystery to her, but Joni yielded to the unknown forces that enticed her to do so, and even felt an adrenaline rush. This was the most excited she had been about something since her protesting days back in college. The next day at work, Joni was emailing an old college friend about the crazy notion she had of working 7 months in Appalachia, when her cell phone started ringing. She casually glanced at it and was about to mute the call when she saw National Park Service pop up on the display. Joni nearly dropped her iPhone after quickly grabbing it to get a closer look. She peered out of her cubicle to case her office, as if the call coming in was from some highly secretive covert operation. She waited a couple more seconds, took a deep breath, then swiped her iPhone screen, finally answering the call. Everything worked out perfectly for Joni to go when she was offered the job 2 weeks later. Subconsciously, Joni thought there would be some sort of snag along the way, keeping her from accepting the position. Maybe that had been her safety net during all of this. The guts to apply had satisfied her ego, but knowing there was only a slim chance of actually being able to go kept her grounded. It was a teasing game with fate, and Joni had always been a good teaser. Yet, to her surprise, her job supervisors at Peyton and Pryor lobbying firm in Frankfort were thrilled for Joni. She was told the experiences that she would receive in this position would make her a more effective lobbyist for rural rights, and that her job would even be waiting for her when her 7-month commitment in Appalachia was over. Even more excited was her doctoral advisor when Joni told him the news. He sprang off his feet, hopped on the corner of his oversized desk, covered in an avalanche of papers, and clapped his hands. "Perfect," Professor Modoff explained. "Oh, how I wish I had this opportunity for academic segregation and inward evaluation while working on my doctorate decades ago." Her advisor must have sensed her confusion. He reached out and gently placed a hand on Joni's shoulder. "Do this, Miss James," he said earnestly. "Never shy away from a learning experience. If we only limit ourselves to that which is familiar, then our sedentary, mundane, and unimaginative lives will have been for naught." A bit dramatic, Joni thought, but Professor Modoff had made his point. Everyone was making perfect sense and wanted her to go to Founder's Gap. Everyone, that is, except her father. As expected, he thought the job would be a waste of Joni's time, when she could be doing more good for herself in the halls of the state's capital in Frankfurt. The fact that her father was completely dead set against her going was the final push that Joni needed to officially accept the position. She spent Labor Day with her father at his annual cookout and pool party, and patiently listened to his incessant lecturing on how she was probably making the worst decision of her life, as he flipped burgers on the grill and drank more mimosas than she could count. Joni would have rather spent Labor Day at the lake, boating with colleagues, the ones she would miss, but felt she should spend time with her father before leaving for Appalachia. She thought it might be the last time she saw him for 7 months, because she wasn't too convinced he would travel to Founder's Gap to visit. Joni's father did, however, show up at her apartment the next morning as she was filling her Tesla to maximum capacity with her luggage. He tried one last time to talk her out of going, but when Joni slid into the driver's seat, he leaned through the car window and handed his daughter a credit card. When she shook her head no, he insisted. He reached over her to the passenger seat and stuffed the credit card in her purse. "Take it, Joni." Her father was serious. "I'm still your father, and I love you very much." For the first time since Joni even couldn't remember when, she saw tenderness in her father's eyes, and perhaps, maybe even some uncertainty. "Don't worry, Daddy," Joni smiled. "I can take care of myself. You raised me to be tough, like you. I'm Daddy's girl, and I'm going to be just fine." Joni was even more surprised when he kissed her on the forehead. He stood up straight and then said, "Get on out of here. Go have your adventure."
I was already gone. I was already gone. I was already gone. Life is a runaway train you can't wait to jump on.
Do you believe in ghosts? Joni wasn't sure if it was the peculiar question or just the sound of Denver's voice that transported her back to the present. She shook her head, either expressing her sheer confusion or still trying to attempt to shake herself back to reality. "Do you believe in ghosts?" Denver repeated. I don't know. I don't think so," Joni stammered. Denver cocked his head to one side and studied his new acquaintance. He squinted his eyes as he stared at Joni, this time not with mischief, but with serious observation. "You had that far-away look about you, like you was somewhere else," Denver said, almost in a whisper. "Or like you was seeing something else." He leaned in closer. "You know, there's reports of ghosts up here. Strange things have been seen and heard up on this mountain." And then Denver paused. "Well, hell, there I went and done it again," Denver declared, standing up. "Some welcome wagon I am, I swear." Joni looked up at the flustered park volunteer and grinned. "Your talk of ghosts and things that go bump in the night does not scare me in the least, Mr. Hensley," Joni said. "Ghosts do not scare me as near as much as having no electricity nor running water." Joni was trying to make light of the conversation and to ease Denver's apparent frustration with himself. Truth was, Denver's talk of scary noises and weird sightings did unnerve Joni. But she wasn't about to let ghost stories and local legends scare her away from her new job. She was here at Founder's Gap for the duration, and she was hell-bent on proving to her father, her friends, and her co-workers, and most importantly to herself, that she could do this. For some unknown reason that reached down to the crevices of her soul, Joni needed to do this. It was a beckoning. "Do you believe in ghosts, Mr. Hensley?" Joni directed the question back to Denver. She thought she would be given an immediate response based on his proven eagerness for conversation, but she was mistaken. There was only silence as Denver leaned against a front porch post and gazed upon the setting sun. He tilted back his cowboy hat, closed his eyes, and began to whistle. Joni shivered just then, and she wasn't sure why. It wasn't cold up on the mountain, and the evening air was thick and sticky with late summer haze and humidity. The only noises joining Denver's lonesome melody of "Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow" were the sweet-sounding chirps of katydids coming from the forest. There was a peacefulness felt by Joni, the kind she imagined while researching Founder's Gap, the kind she knew would lure her to sleep with her window open and her curtain softly dancing in the mountain breeze she hoped would blow lightly into her bedroom window tonight. But Joni also sensed restlessness. For a century-old historic village that had more graves than the living, there was an undeniable, restless feeling about the place. "Now that's the kind of sunset that gets a man's attention," Denver finally spoke. "You can't ignore a sunset like that. No, sir." Joni glanced out over the vista of rolling hills that rose up like waves surrounding the highest swell of ancient mountain that she stood upon, the mountain that held Founder's Gap upon its crest. The tide of hills seemed to ebb and flow toward the fieriest sunset Joni had ever seen. Wispy clouds turned scarlet right before Joni's eyes. This wasn't a sunset, Joni thought. It was nature putting on a show, and a dazzling one at that. When the last of the Appalachian fireball fell behind a distant black ridge, Denver spoke up again, but kept his sights fixed on the horizon. "You wonder if I believe in ghosts?" Denver asked. "Yeah," Joni simply and softly answered, not sure if it was the spectacular sunset that made her at a loss for words, or that restless feeling that was becoming more evident. "We all have ghosts," Denver said. "Ghosts of who we used to be, ghosts of lives we'll never live again, and ghosts of people we used to love." Joni thought she heard Denver's voice shake a little. "Memories are my ghosts, and they haunt me every night," Denver continued. "They come creeping into my thoughts like silent vapors in the wind, and it's a host of stuff that make them appear to me like a song, a smell." Denver's words trailed off. Joni didn't know if he was going to finish his thought or not, and then he said, "Like a damn crimson sunset on a hot September evening." It was then that Joni realized that Denver's ghosts were very real. Sorry about that, Joni." Denver turned around and faced her. "Sometimes, well..." He looked out over the mountains again and shook his head. "Damn sunset." Then it was like someone flipped a switch. Within seconds, Denver was back to his playful self. He picked up 2 of Joni's bags and pretended he could barely lift them as he carried them through the front door of the caretaker's cabin. "I reckon you did pack a racehorse or 2, didn't you, Miss Bluegrass?" Joni was shocked when she saw the interior of the cabin, pleasantly shocked. With every light switch Denver flipped on, more modern conveniences could be seen that made Joni very relieved that her 7-month mountaintop stay would not be a rugged plight of hardship and misery. There was a gas stone fireplace, a plush, oversized couch, and matching chairs all comfortably placed on top of a designer rug. and even candles were lit throughout the cabin that gave the place the most charming fragrance. Joni saw a butcher-block dining table toward the back with an elegant antique chandelier hanging above it. Around the corner from the dining room was the kitchen, which was as big as the one in Joni's apartment back in Lexington. Joni noticed the full-size refrigerator, gas stove, microwave, and even a dishwasher. And everything was stylishly decorated in modern lodge decor. When Joni saw the huge bouquet of wildflowers on the kitchen island, Denver said, "Those were picked by Miss Emma. You'll meet her later. She wanted to make sure the cabin had a feminine touch." He rolled his eyes and then said, "Like it matters if a cabin in the middle of the wilderness has got a feminine touch or not. Sheesh. Come on. I'll show you the back porch before I help you take your luggage upstairs." Lovely curtained French doors behind the dining room table opened onto the cabin's back porch. "A hot tub?" Joni squealed. Her evening just improved 100%. There on a sizable deck with outdoor furniture and baskets of white and pink impatiens overflowing to the ground was a decent-sized hot tub already steaming up the night air. Joni jumped for joy and even tackled Denver with an unexpected hug. "Well, now," he coyishly behaved, "if I'd have known a hot tub would have made you this happy, I'd have brought you here first." "Oh, I'm sorry," Joni said, pulling away, but was still evidently excited. "I just never really expected anything like this." Denver walked over to the hot tub and pulled the cover back over it. "Guess someone forgot to cover it back up," he said. "The way Park Administration sees it around here is that the folks working up here in the middle of nowhere and practically for nothing deserve some perks. Now don't let the gas fireplace, nice kitchen, and this here hot tub fool you, Joni. It gets mighty lonesome up here, and the elements are harsh. It's going to be a challenge for you." Denver could see the uncertainty returning to Joni's eyes, so he quickly added, "But you can do it. They wouldn't have hired you if they didn't think you was cut out for the job. They're not going to hire no liability." Just then, the sounds of a horse neighing came from the bottom of the hill, where Joni could see lights flickering in the distance. "Who's that?" she inquired. "Damned if I know," Denver answered, leaning over the back porch railing to get a better look at the valley below. "Wonder what he's doing out here this evening." "You don't know who all is up here?" Now Joni was really concerned. "You're not going to be completely alone up here," Denver said, "which is a good thing. Don't worry. Preacher Mosley and his wife Emma like to stay up here during the winter. They say it's their annual spiritual retreat and makes them feel closer to God or something. He pastors the Baptist church in the Founders Gap community down off the mountain, and they're good people. It was Miss Emma who picked you those flowers in there and made sure your cabin smelled like pumpkin spice and shit with all those candles." "I guess Founders Gap has never had a female caretaker, have they?" It was more of a statement than a question from Joni. "Not one who's single, that's for damn sure," Denver exclaimed. "We've had couples and families to stay up here, but you're our first single gal. Congratulations, Miss Bluegrass." Joni tried to not let her apprehension show. She directed Denver's attention off the hillside to the valley below, where there seemed to be horse stables. "Who lives there?" "I don't rightly know," Denver answered. "Usually they stable the horses that's used up here during the summer for horseback riding and hay rides close to the park headquarters off the mountain. But for some reason they're keeping them up here for the winter, and they've hired them a stable man. I've not met him yet, and just seen him around a few times. He keeps to himself." There were more sounds of horse hooves and neighing coming off the hill, and Joni heard what sounded like the gait of a thoroughbred galloping into the woods. You couldn't live in Lexington, Kentucky, and be a part of the social scene without having some familiarity with horses. "Now I wonder where he's headed off to in such a hurry this time of evening," Denver said under his breath. "Strange bird, that'n." Denver didn't want to once again concern Joni, so he ushered her back into the cabin and reminded her how the park only hired upright and capable employees. The most pleasing fragrance of cinnamon and other autumn spices filled the cabin, as the two made their way to the stairs. "I swear to my goodness," Denver said as he picked up two of Joni's luggage, "I told Miss Emma, it ain't going to matter what this here place smells like. Bigfoot ain't going to care not one red cent if it smells like apple blossoms or hot maple toddy." Joni laughed out loud. "Well, maybe not," Joni said as she picked up two of her bags. "But it sure is nice for the person staying here." "I guess you're right, Miss Bluegrass," Denver said. Denver winked at Joni and the two headed upstairs. Joni couldn't believe what the second level looked like after ascending the staircase. It led to her bedroom area, which was situated in the middle of what looked like a studio flat. The entire upstairs was open, with a king-size bed, a reading nook, and chairs at a huge cathedral window, plus another gas fireplace with a stone mantel. On the other side was an office area that included a desk, computer and printer, and 4 tall shelves filled with books. The only closed-in area was a bathroom on the far end of the huge loft space. Joni dropped her bags and immediately went to the books. "I think I may never leave this place," she sighed as she pulled out a book about mountain myths and legends. "Don't say as I blame you." Denver seemed just as shocked with the quality of Joni's living conditions. "I ain't never been upstairs before. Sheesh. I think I'm going to have to apply for this position next year." Denver placed Joni's luggage near the walk-in closet and went downstairs to retrieve more of her bags. On his third trip, he came back to find Joni sitting Indian style on the bed, already deeply engrossed in a book. The title on the hardcover read, "Appalachian Darkness." "I ain't no book burner, but if I had a match, I'd use that one for kindling," Denver said flatly. "What in tarnation does the Park Service have that shit in here?" "Well, so far it's," Joni began. "It's wrong," Denver interrupted her. "It's damn wrong." "Well, I sense some hostility," Joni said. "You'd be mad as hell, too, if someone came in your neck of the woods and basically wrote that y'all and your kind were no good, ignorant, inbred yokels." Denver walked toward the bed, but before sitting down he asked, "May I?" "Sure," Joni replied. "That book was written by a Harvard student who came in here just to exploit our people, do his dissertation, and get his doctorate." Denver's eyes were blazing. "Nothing makes me madder than outlanders coming in here and talking bad about our people, than profiting off the lies they tell." Joni closed the book and laid it down on the bed beside her. And Denver continued, "We got our problems here in Appalachia, but it ain't nowhere as gloomy of a place as these outlanders make it out to be. People just love to exploit us, and I'd be damned if we don't allow it to happen. Our descendants came from the original brave pioneers of Daniel Boone days, and from the hard-working coal miners and the loggers who built these communities. We're a people who are very close to nature and to God, but these so-called do-gooders want to come in here, proclaim to help us, then go back to where they came from and write about how they tried to save our hillbilly souls and profit off of our misfortune. I tell you, I get madder than a wet hen when I sit and ponder on it." Joni stood up from the bed and walked back over to the study area. She slipped the book back into the shelf where she found it. "Well, I'm sorry," she turned around and told Denver. "You don't need to apologize. Not yet." Denver winked at Joni. "I just wanted you to know there's more to Appalachia than what you'll read in these books. To really know this place and our people, it takes living here among us. It takes seriously getting to know our people and becoming familiar with our real struggles. I reckon I just wanted you to know that. I reckon I just wanted to keep you from being the next outlander who leaves here with bad stories to tell to your bluegrass buddies." Joni thought for a moment and then looked square at Denver. "I'll make you a deal. If you won't be so quick to stereotype me or judge my intentions, I won't be so quick to stereotype you. How's that sound?" Denver didn't agree to the deal right off the bat. Instead, he studied Joni some more. At first, Denver's acute observations of her were a bit disconcerting to Joni, but she was getting used to it by now. "I like you, Joni James," Denver smiled. "I can tell already that we're going to be good buddies. And to answer your question, yes, my dear, you've got a deal." Denver stood up from the bed and walked over to Joni with an extended arm, and they both firmly shook hands. "I've got to know something," Joni sheepishly stated. "How in the world did you know that I belong to the organization Kentuckians for a Brighter Future?" Denver's eyes were shining. "This place just does weird things to your mind." Denver moved in closer. "It's full of what they call mystique up here. And it makes you have certain mind-reading abilities." If Denver wasn't being so over-dramatic, Joni would have been more prone to believe him, because the mountain was already getting to her. But she could see through his teasing and his bad acting. "Okay, so I don't have powers," Denver laughed. They're on your purse." He pointed to Joni's fossil bag laying on the floor. "You got a big old tag that has Kentuckians for a Brighter Future printing on it." "Well, son of a gun," Joni exclaimed. Denver busted out laughing again. Joni was keeping the jokester thoroughly entertained. "Don't let this mountain get to you, Joni," Denver said. "They might be unexplained things that happen up here, but just remember, being observant and using a little common sense will make things much easier for you." Before leaving, Denver shared some basic cabin information with Joni. He showed her where the breaker box was located, the hot water heater, where all the provisions and tools were that she had at her disposal in the storage closet, and also how to adjust the thermostat and monitor the methane gas intake for both fireplaces and the stove. He also showed her how to use a Park CB system that was set up at the cabin in case of an emergency, if phone lines or cell service were down. Back out on the porch, Denver hesitantly turned around on the steps to ask Joni one last question before leaving the mountain. "If I might be so bold, Joni James, just why are you here? A nice-looking young woman such as yourself from the big city could have better things to do." Joni looked up at the night sky, not sure what to say. If the sunset hadn't been enough to wow her senses, the endless yet calm black sea of twinkling stars, now sparkling above her head, was certainly enough to do so. Joni thought the stars looked like diamonds. They seemed so close that she was almost tempted to reach up and try to touch one. "My grandma always said you couldn't get any closer to God than standing on a mountain," Denver said. A cool breeze began to stir, cutting the thick humidity like a chilled knife. "I think your grandma was right," Joni replied. "I've never seen anything more beautiful." Still gazing into the night heavens, Joni answered Denver's question. "I don't know why I'm here," was all she said. Then she looked at Denver and added, "But I know there's a reason." Joni diverted the question back to Denver. "Why are you here, Mr. Hensley? You're a handsome man who appears to be well-read and intelligent. What keeps you here at this park?" "I came here to hide from my ghost." Denver was stone-faced serious. "But they're here too." Again the sounds of galloping could be heard in the distance. It was soft thuds at first, and Joni thought it was her heart beating wildly. But as the galloping grew louder, Joni knew it was her new mysterious neighbor riding his thoroughbred. As fast as the galloping came, it disappeared. The rider vanished into the night, leaving any inkling of who he was dissipating, and the shrouds of dust settling over the dirt road. "One more thing before I leave you for the night," Denver said. "You know that book upstairs that got me all riled up? That feller who wrote it stayed here. He was a caretaker once, and he was staying here working on his book about the place. I befriended him, flew him up in my Cessna several times to get aerial photos of the mountains. After reading his book and seeing what garbage he wrote, I never took Elsie back up again. I was done." "Elsie, the name of your plane?" Joni asked. "Yeah." "And the name of my wife?" Denver was cold again. "Where is she?" "She's dead." And with that, Denver tromped down the front porch steps and climbed into his Jeep Wrangler. Joni stayed on the front porch and watched his headlights zigzag down the mountain until she couldn't see them anymore. She knew she'd go back inside and begin unpacking before she got too tired. But it just wasn't in her tonight. just in the span of a 3-hour drive and 150 miles motoring southward. So much had started to change for Joni. She was swirling in an eddy of apprehension, uncertainty, yet excitement and wanderlust. So much was permeating her mind and soul that it left her totally exhausted. Joni had no regrets with her new adventure, and was curious to see what the next 7 months had in store for her. She already felt like she had made a friend in Denver, and was looking forward to knowing more about him. She was anxious to meet the Reverend Mosley and his wife Emma, and was intrigued to find out who her elusive equestrian neighbor was. Joni's thoughts were interrupted by the shrill of her iPhone ringing. She pulled it out of her front jeans pocket and saw that her father was calling. "Oh no," Joni exclaimed, after seeing she had 10 missed calls from him. She hurriedly swiped the accept button and then declared, "Oh, Daddy, I'm so sorry. I didn't know how late it was." Joni spent the next hour calming her father down, who had told her he was ready to dispatch the National Guard. Forgetting to check in with him and not hearing his incessant 10 missed calls gave her father all the reason he needed to insist that Joni admit she had made a foolhardy decision and return home come morning. She coaxed her father as she gave him a virtual tour of the cabin, using her iPhone FaceTime app. Seeing all the comforts and amenities put his mind at ease some, but he still took great pains trying to convince her to come back to Lexington. She blew out all the sweet-smelling candles while talking to her father, and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. "Oh, Miss Emma left a note with her flowers," Joni said. "Well, don't keep us in suspense. By all means, tell us what Miss Emma has to say." Joni's father was being condescending, but she paid him no mind as she began reading the letter out loud. It was filled with hospitable introductions and blessings for a successful stay. "If you are so inclined, I would love to share breakfast with you in the morning," Joni continued reading the letter. "I will be at your door at 10 a.m. with homemade biscuits and sausage gravy, and will fry up some farm-fresh eggs once I get there. I look forward to meeting you, Joni, and becoming close friends over the next 7 months. Us ladies have got to stick together up here on the mountain. I hope you find your first night at Founder's Gap restful and filled with the most pleasant of dreams. God bless, Emma Mosley." "Oh, now didn't that sound nice, Daddy?" Joni placed the note on the refrigerator door with a magnet. "See, I'm going to be just fine. Miss Emma and her husband, who's the Reverend Mosley, they live up here during the winter months, and their cabin is just right around the bend." "Well, I'm not completely convinced, but Miss Emma and I do have one thing in common," Martin stated, "and that's we hope you get a good night's sleep. I know you must be worn out, Joni. Go to bed and get some rest. You're going to need it, babe." "I am starting to feel sleepy," Joni said. "Maybe I should turn in for the night." "So tell me, how does it feel being way up on some forlorn mountain in the middle of godforsaken Appalachian wilderness?" Martin asked his daughter as if she was taking the stand in court. Joni was used to her father's intense line of questioning. "I feel like I just stepped off of a carousel," Joni answered between yawns. "Like the ones you let me ride as a kid that just went round and round and round and round. There's no rush up here, no push for deadlines nor constant activity. There's no movement, no same thing over and over again. It's just like time stands still." Joni's father started humming the tune to the Joni Mitchell song, Circle Game. "Remember that one, Joni? And the seasons, they go round and round, and the painted ponies go up and down. We're captive on the carousel of time, and we can't return. We can only look behind from where we came, and go round and round and round in the circle game." As Joni softly sank in the billowy mattress of her king-size bed, her father's voice singing the chorus of Circle Game began luring her to sleep. Just as she'd hoped, there was a breeze blowing up on the mountain that night. She left her bedroom window open and let the wind, the dancing curtains, Joni Mitchell, visions of carousels and fleeting ghosts, and the distant thunder of horses' hooves be her lullaby.
And the seasons, they go round and round, and the painted ponies go up and down. We're captive on the carousel of time. We can't return, we can only look behind from where we came, and go round and round and round in a circle again. Then the child moved 10 times round the season.